But thank you for joining us today. We're going to talk about some of where it's not so black and white in this session, and specifically in the area of ethics. So first, let's introduce who the three of us are.
My name is John Wilkerson, and I'm the Assistant Vice President for International Affairs at Indiana University. Part of my portfolio, the part that I'm quite partial to, is international admissions. But in this capacity today, I'm actually going to be addressing you as Vice President for the Admissions Enrollment Practices Board with International ACAC. It's the International Association for College Admissions Counseling, which helps to create some of the guidance that we're going to visit today.
Great. I'm Renee Bowling. I'm Head of College and Career Counseling at Woodstock School up in Missouri.
Hi, I'm Shilpa from Nirja Modi School, Jaipur, and I'm the Vice Principal and the Head of College Counseling there.
Super. So you'll do it? Great. So what are we talking about here? There actually exists an ethical code for our profession, which is wonderful. NACAC is a membership organization, National Association of College and Admission Counseling, and its international affiliate is the International ACAC, which basically speaks to what we do, whether it's the university or the school counseling side of the desk. And it's been concerned with ethical practice in admissions from the 1930s, which I didn't realize. It's been quite a long time. And it is a membership organization. So many universities that are recruiting students in high schools are members of this organization, and therefore, to some extent, they need to follow this code of ethics. So it's good if you're in a high school that you're aware that it exists. Just polling the room, how many of you are working in high schools now? And how many college representatives do we have? Excellent. Any principals in the room? A few? Thank you. Well, welcome.
Could I also ask how many of you are members right now of International ACAC? And keep your hand up if you are also a member of NACAC. Okay, great. Thank you.
So what we're referencing today is the Code of Ethics, CEPP, which was adopted by the membership body in 2017. How many of you knew that something like this existed before today? Again, mostly the university side, which may be members of the organization, which is why we wanted to especially bring it to the attention of schools in this region. It does provide some ethical guidelines, some principles, and the main goal of it is to protect students from unethical practices, which is something that I know all of us care about. Great. Do you want to describe a little bit more about it?
Sure. So the going back just a second, the SPGP, the Statement of Principles and Good Practices, was kind of a long-standing document that was just how it sounds. It was a statement of principles. Kind of a nice suggestion that since the 1930s became a little less nice and a little bit more like this is what you ought to do. The new CEPP takes that a step further and for the first time actually codifies that best practice in a way that can be actionable if there are offenses. So that's helpful for you to know as well, and the CEPP has made that document much more digestible. It's quite easy to navigate, to figure out, to either get guidance or figure out if some type of offense or possible offense has taken place. What is especially important in the CEPP is that it goes a step beyond that and also gives some transparency to the inquiry process. So if you do see something that you think might be questionable, it will tell you how that investigation will take place, give you an idea of your role within that inquiry process, how the adjudication will occur, and what potential outcomes might be depending on how the investigation plays out. Renee has put together some really great bullets about new focus areas. Now, most of these were already existing within the SPGP, but there's greater emphasis on them. So you'll see this May 1st. The second part of that statement is what's really great. The emphasis on May 1st for U.S. colleges. So we are very excited within International ACAC to see in this new document for the first time very specific behaviors that relate to international student mobility, both from the counseling side and from the university side. Now, to be fair, and this is kind of the gray area that we're going to get into, some of those protections or guidances are a little bit more broad than what we would typically see. So keep in mind, this is a living document. It's meant to be navigable and digested and referenced often, but we suspect that as this field, as international student mobility continues to diversify in terms of destination, that this document will also continue to evolve in that space.
Yeah, it's fair to say that this came from a more U.S.-centric focus in the past, and it's moving to a more international place. It's not quite there yet, but it's making efforts in its current iteration. You'll see up here that there's some examples of things that affect universities and things that affect the reporting that school counselors do. So there's responsibilities and duties on both sides. And that, if you want to take a photo of it, is where you can find the document itself for some nice reading before bed tonight.
And it's just 20 pages, so it's not too bad.
It is organized like this in sections. It is very easy to find what you're looking for. If you're looking for something to do with deadlines or something to do with commissioned agents, you can find a section in there pretty easily to reference. I recommend sharing this around your office, letting the other schools in your region know about it. I think it's a really handy reference for us to have, even sometimes in our work with parents, to clarify what's good practice and what's not.
Oftentimes when we see documents like this, we skip through the first few pages, the preamble, the ethos, the mission, because, right? I would actually encourage you to read this. It's got some pretty powerful statements that help to contextualize the purpose, the intent. It's a little bit motivating and well written, so there's my plug.
All right, do you want to briefly walk us through what happens when there's an inquiry, and we can, I think, move on a slide then too.
Sure. So, when we do so in any of these scenarios, the case studies that we'll get in today, our hope is that first you would refer to the document, see what you can find. If you're not sure, or if it still is kind of in a gray area, then submitting a complaint is really just submitting an inquiry. So I think that's an important takeaway for you. Nobody's in trouble yet when you submit an inquiry. Instead, it's more of a question. So you outline for us the situation that is of concern, and that's triaged first within the International ACAC Admissions Practices Committee. So that inquiry comes to us. It's completely anonymous. We review it. There are 3 members of that committee who take an initial evaluation of what's going on. The composition of the committee is diverse. So there are 12 members. It's equal parts university representatives, counselors, and we also have a couple of community-based organizations. Right now there are 6 countries represented, including India. So that's intentional. We want that kind of voice. We feel that it should never be just one person from one part of our field determining where this goes. If we're unsure or we feel it warrants additional scrutiny, then it progresses up to the broader committee. And so all 12 members of that committee deliberate. It's important to know at that point both the complainant and the potential offender are anonymous. So the other committee members have no idea who is involved in this. In fact, the executive board of International ACAC, the leadership of NACAC, they have no idea who is involved in this. So we really are, we're functioning from the premise of innocence before guilt, and also I would say 95% of the complaints that do come in result in what we call voluntary resolution, meaning that if we decide that some outreach needs to take place to the potential offender, most of the time that organization or individual was just unaware, and they voluntarily rectify the behavior, and it's done, and it's a learning opportunity. In the 5% that doesn't happen, then it progresses up to national committee, and a more in-depth conversation occurs.
Yeah, I would say that since I've become aware that there is an ethical code of practice, there are things where I have gone to the other party and said, did you know that this exists? And it's something that we're trying to follow. It looks like maybe this is not quite according to the best practice? Is that something you want to try to follow? And usually they're like, oh, I had no idea this existed. We're happy to follow it. So I think a lot of things can actually get resolved before even becoming an inquiry or a complaint. Just reaching out to the school or the partner to make them aware that this is a thing usually does the trick.
Can you just contextualize that when you say what is an inquiry, when you're saying that you speak to our party, whether this is in what context, I mean, what would the other party, what would could you just contextualize?
We're going to get to the case studies right away, but I can tell you from my experience, something that I contacted a university about was a third party that they had contracted with that was doing recruitment practices here in India that was not following some of the normal deadlines of the U.S., and the university that had contracted with them was unaware of some of the recruitment practices that the third party was using here. And when I brought it to their attention, that became a conversation between them and the vendor, and it quickly got resolved. So those kind of things I think are helpful for those of us as counselors to know that we can actually take some action in those situations and get some of these shadier practices to maybe decrease a little bit.
And to that point, International ACAC is happy to have that conversation regardless of membership. So even if you're interacting with an organization or an individual who's not a member, we will still conduct outreach on your behalf.
Okay, here we go. I'm going to let you take this one.
All right. So each of these are drawn from true scenarios. So these are case studies that have actually occurred. And most of them are nuanced. So we're going to read through them, ask a couple of questions, and then we'd like you in small groups, just with neighbors or whatnot, to talk through it, and then we'll have a discussion about what we think, whether or not this is a violation. So a student has applied early decision to a U.S. university. The university has subsequently offered the student a space at its branch campus in Europe and is requiring confirmation and deposit by March 1st. Now, these are the questions. Is it a complaint? What factors should be considered? And if it is a complaint or if an inquiry is warranted, to whom should it be made? Remember that emphasis on May 1st? So that's why the March 1st piece is in there. All right, so we're going to give you guys a couple of minutes to discuss, and then we'll come back to you. All right, so let's come back together.
Find out the answer.
Yes, so just raise hands. Let me preface this by saying this is a nuanced and complex situation. All right, so raise your hand if you think that this is compliant with SPGP, or with the ethics. Okay, all right, well that was unanimous. Tell me some factors that are at issue here. Nadia?
Hi. So we had a little discussion between the four of us actually. So I can stand. That's okay, I can stand. I think everyone can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Everyone can hear Nadia.
So we had a couple of questions when we looked at this. And one of the main questions for us was that, is there a question on the application that allows the student to understand there's a possibility they might get a spot in the Europe campus? And also the March 1st deadline, is it due to the fact that the time of enrollment and when classes actually start? And if the student is aware of this, then, for us, the university has put it out there, the student is very understanding of what's going to take place. So yes, it will be compliant with what was offered initially. But if it's not, then there's a lot of questions to be asked before you can actually say, if inquiry is needed. Too many questions.
Okay. So possibly compliant, but there are questions. All right. Others? David.
Thanks, John. I would say that this may be technically compliant, but I think in a kind of standard natural justice is not. The student has applied ED to study at that campus. You're offering them something else, so you release them from the ED commitment. That's just the right thing to do.
So there's an ick factor that okay. That is not terminology in the SPGP, but any other thoughts? All right. So you guys have actually done a really good job unpacking this. There are a few things going on. So let's start with the fact that the student has applied early decision. So when the student applies early decision, there's an agreement that they enter into. Now, I will tell you this was compliant, but I will qualify that for all of the reasons that you just said. Part of the application to this institution included a space where the student could indicate if early decision is not offered to you in your campus of choice, would you like to be considered for early decision at one of these campuses? In this case, the student had indicated yes, they would like to be considered for ED. At that point, the student was released from early decision to the campus to which they had applied. But the terms of early decision at this institution did allow for the deposit by March 1st if that student accepted the early decision offer to the branch campus. The alternative would be that the student was being offered deferred consideration for regular decision. So it wasn't a deny situation or, take this or nothing. There is still an ick factor. And there were factors in which Renee has pointed out in a preparation for this, that as part of the application process, a counselor wouldn't always know that question had been posed and that the student had asked that. And in that instance, you as counselors would be relying on the memory and stability of a 17-year-old applicant to say, oh yes, this is an agreement that I entered into. So, yeah, Nadia.
I was going to say that's absolutely true because in our application there's a MAC question, and a lot of times students get MAC for a different program, and when they get that acceptance letter, there's a big question to the university: why am I accepted to this program? I never applied for this. Why am I being accepted to this particular campus? And then we have to go back and say, can you check the application you submitted? And one of the things too that I realize is that sometimes students don't always understand what it means for them.
Yeah. The outcome of this, it was suggested to this institution that they alter some of their communications subsequent to application and significantly alter their initial letter, their offer. Anything to add to that from a counselor perspective?
Yeah, I think for the universities in the room, if you're making those kind of alternate offers, a student may not have fully understood. So the more clear you can be in the offer letter, is this still a binding agreement? What happens if they decline it? Will they still be considered for their original or a third choice program? The more you can put in that offer letter, the more we can help unpack it with them in our offices.
So you might think, how would I ever know? The SPGP now outlines practices for universities with branch campuses in other countries. So this is now a more transparent code of ethics to which universities should adhere.
So also I'm sure most of you come across a situation where your students have applied to multiple countries, right? And UK, has conditional offers. And you have a student who's accepted ED at a US university. So what do you advise then? Anybody? What's your advice to that student?
So this would be a student who's entered into early decision at a US institution,
but has also cleared the condition of a UK university or a Singapore university. So she says they will have to join the place where they did ED.
So as an independent counsellor, I work with students at lots of different schools, and when I get this question, I say this is the school's decision as to their interpretation of, do they expect ED to apply worldwide or just within the United States and branch campuses? And that's the school's view. If I'm asked by the school, I say this applies worldwide. But I have to say it's the school's decision as to, are they willing to release grades, transcripts, whatever, to a campus other than where a student has committed ED, and that's entirely to do with the school.
So you are both correct. This is a case that actually, this scenario that you outlined actually just came up understandably recently, as it is the season, and it required, the SPGP does actually make a statement that students should only be making deposits one per country. So there is now, and this is new to David's point, there is now some recognition that calendars don't always align. It's not fair. If we think of the intent of the May 1st deadline is to allow students to consider all of their offers before committing. So there are two approaches here. SPGP would allow that student in this scenario to deposit at an institution in the U.S. while they're awaiting an offer from a UK university, for example. The preferred route would be that that student and counselor contact the U.S. university, advise them of the situation, and oftentimes in that scenario, a deposit extension will be offered so that they don't have to commit. It fulfills the intent. So this, again, is a gray area where SPGP is really trying to pay attention to the intent of that May 1st deadline, but also accommodate a global audience of students.
My understanding of this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about that, is that before there was an understanding that a student had to withdraw all their other applications. Yep. Now the understanding is it's possible to deposit one per country.
Correct.
Even with ED to the US, which was surprising to me as a counselor and a different interpretation than we had taken it to mean before. But the fact that that is now becoming generally more aware amongst US universities is something that I think is helpful for us to know.
I do think keeping to the spirit of that disclosure from the student and counselor really checks all the boxes, that everything is transparent. SPGP allows for it, everyone knows what's happening, and then it does become the university's decision to decide if they want to do the deposit extension, and also the counselors and the school's decision as to what extent they would want to support multiple deposits.
I will be honest, I think this is an area where there's a little naivety about how much gaming is happening.
I agree.
And I think that's something, an area for future development in this code of ethics over time. Once they realize, I think, scaling of this as students become more globally mobile. But for now, that's where it is.
That's okay. I just wanted to double check that I did hear that correctly. So you said one per country, including ED in the U.S. is the recommend.
It is a gray area in the current code of ethics.
It is allowed. It is allowed.
Just want to make sure I heard that right.
Yeah. Well, and that's why this case actually went up to national committee. We're like, what do we do here? Yeah. And the ultimate deciding factor really did have to do with that spirit of the May 1st being, this is a case where the student doesn't really have all of their offers, and it wasn't because the student was non-compliant with a calendar or awaiting decision, just the systems where they were applying would have eliminated that UK choice altogether had they adhered to just one deposit.
Offer the course of their choice. Is that an equally compelling reason as the financial, aid?
It's typically part of the ED agreement, so those stipulations will be built into the agreement. I really do think that the takeaway in that scenario, though, is the transparency, and I think that that's what made that situation work, is that all of the players were involved. There was no opacity. The student wasn't trying to game the system one way or another. Both universities understood what was happening. It was, it was collegial and transparent, and the subsequent dialogue allowed for a resolution, not even a resolution, as I said, it never gets a complaint, but it allowed for the situation to be resolved in a way that was a benefit to the student, but also was not detrimental to either institution, because they had time to make contingencies, potentially open a wait list or another conditional, nobody, and that's the other piece, is 2 spots, 1 student, there's a spot that's waiting for another student in that equation. And so having that conversation and that transparency allowed both institutions to kind of plan for that, of, well, what happens when the student does need to make the decision, because we still have a class to shape.
So just from my own perspective, I'm still advising students read your ED agreements carefully, determine whether they're internationally binding, and basically only apply ED if you have a clear first choice in the world. Otherwise, it's not the decision plan for you. So I think if we stick to that advice, we're in a pretty good space.
And watch this space. it is evolving. And to that point, when you do have questions, we would hope that you're forwarding those to International ACAC. We are the body that is helping to educate the iterations of this document that continues. So,
And we are aware that this This is gray.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did you want to take the next one?
So the next one is on commissioned agents. So a prospective international student was contacted by Mr. Agent representing a foreign university. When the student goes to the university's website, they cannot find any information about Mr. Agent on the website. The student follows up with a phone call and the foreign university confirms Mr. Agent does represent them abroad. Now, is this a compliant? What factors should be considered? And if a complaint or inquiry is warranted, to whom should it be made? So again, small groups discuss. So according to you, what do you think? Where should the information be? Does the website need to have the information of the agent? Yes. So the factors to be considered is that the website needs to have information of the respective agent in that particular country.
Now, for our university friends in the audience, this is new. So, if you're working with agents right now and don't have it on your website, you're compliant. Going forward, mid-September, this is an issue. Again, transparency.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, I do. So, in that context, an increasing number of institutions of higher education in the U.S., for example, are not working directly with agents and do not pay commissions to agents, and yet they have a third-party partner that is working directly with agents and is contracting with them and is giving them access to represent your institution's brand. So in that complex matrix of issues, how does this inform understanding of responsibilities?
Disclosure is still required, and I think that the key metric I think to use is if this is someone who is receiving commission from anyone who's acting either on behalf of or as an agent of the institution. So if it's not that university's paid employee who is not receiving a commission, then this doesn't apply. But if somebody is, so in that third-party agreement, it would still have to be disclosed that such and such university works with da-da-da-da-da, who employs the following agents who may represent us. And really it has to do with if a student's interacting with someone and they've got their business card, they need to be able to know they are legitimately affiliated with the university, so what they're telling me is good. And you can imagine situations where commissioned agents may be saying that they're affiliated with the university when in fact they're not. So it's actually a dual protection. It's not just for students, it's for university reputational protections as well.
And I'm looking forward to a day when we can tell our students this and say, oh, you can check on their website. Who are their reputable
check the
contacts
email
in this
ID, yeah.
country?
Or maybe
Yeah.
check the email ID,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It also, I think for counselors too, if we see some shady things going on with a particular individual, it lets us know that there's a relationship with the university that we can have a dialogue about that with, that it's not just somebody operating on their own, but they are underneath the university representing them, that there's a relationship there. So I think it gives context for having those conversations when they need to happen.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to do this one?
Sure. All right. Financial aid. A student has received a generous financial aid award from Ladue University. The student's top choice is mine too, Jalebi College, and student contacts Ladue U to ask if they will revise their award to match that of Jalebi College. Ladue asks for a copy of the financial aid award from Jalebi as part of their reconsideration. Is this compliant? Discuss. All right. Thoughts. So how many of you think this is compliant? Okay. And how many think it is not? The gray has spoken, yes.
One, I'd like to know what the financial page of the Laddu University. Yeah, they say does Laddu University actually mention that they're going to match up the aid package, because universities mention that on the financial aid page. I would also want to, I mean, maybe the student isn't really ethically right here. It's not about the universities. In the first instance, I wouldn't encourage a student to do that if it's very clear on the financial aid package. After that, asking, that I'm not sure of, because it's how do they match up? They need to know that the student is right. Does a counselor email and ask, or tell them that that's the package? I mean, these are some questions I have.
Sure. They're good questions, and I think in the counseling session, they absolutely matter. In terms of compliance, not so much. This actually is compliant, but there are key factors that, and you've touched on some of those. So the fact that the student has disclosed the name of the university is one. Because if we had asked as a university, tell us who made the offer, then we're asking the student to disclose a competitor, another university, and that is problematic. That is not good. Yeah. And then the other factor here is, at that point, then the institution is really wanting to verify the offer in order to counteroffer. So it has less to do with, really, it's just a verification that's happening here. But I understand what you're saying. Yes, Nadia.
But I would say, though, it's a responsibility of the student to submit that information and not
Yeah.
the counselor to hold the university.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Do you want to, from a counselor perspective?
Yeah, I mean, this definitely the student, but suppose the student is shy and I think needs help of the counselor. What would you say on that case? How do you see an email coming from a counselor?
So coming from a university perspective,
Yeah.
I would email the students and say, you have to send me written confirmation, and the person who's inquiring on your behalf. And it's the same thing we will do for agents as well. You have to tell me you've given that person permission to inquire on your behalf. And we totally understand. We work with counselors all the time. A lot of times counselors will inquire for students, submit transcripts and all these things. But when coming to money, that's a little tricky issue, because that's a little more private issue. So yes, I would reach out to the student first, or the student parent if they allow that as well. That's before the whole enrollment for the business.
I agree. That would be our approach too. In this situation, we would need to hear from the student.
I think this does bring up a good point, though, that the CEPP, this code of ethics, it has a little bit of teeth when it comes to counselor members and university members, but it does not police students. Right? So it can only speak to our responsibilities to each other and to students in the process, but it's not actually enforceable on students and families as much as some of us might like that.
Yeah, that's a good point for any of these case studies. Even going back to the ED conversation, if you knew a student was applying multiple, you are not the police for that student. You can advise, this is what needs to happen, but ultimately, you can't make the student do what they ought to do.
You can't undo if the student has done something wrong with the process.
Correct.
And I would add, Shilpa asked, what if the student is shy and they're, having
Approach
trouble
the counselor.
communicating? As a university perspective, and then from the counselor perspective, I would offer to do a conference call where used to talk, doing the multiple, we're teaching them, the student, to be responsible, but they have the counselor's support if there is the need to mitigate the conversation.
It's a very good approach.
Okay, discipline reporting. Here we go. A high school profile states, per district policy, it is our policy not to report expulsions or out-of-school suspensions imposed on students. Now a student has been expelled from the school, and the school has notified all of the colleges to which that student applies that the student is no longer attending. Would this be compliant with the Code of Ethics? Talk amongst yourselves.
We heard some preliminary responses.
Okay, does anyone want to hazard a guess or say what their neighbor thought?
I think it's a very clever choice of words by the school.
Just
What do the university folks think about this?
Nadia and I have a little bit of a different approach. And mine is that it's almost like that parenting thing. Now I'm going to punish you. So in this case, the school is reaching out to further punish the student and disclosing the information to universities about the student's situation. I still think at that point it's on the student to complete their application process, and at some point we will need to receive their official final transcript, and we will see if they completed their education, and then it's on university to rescind the offer and everything like that.
Okay, and Nadia, what was your?
So that's a little gray area. Because
Hints. That's good to hear.
if a school says a student is no longer attending, full stop, that's fine. But if you go into reasoning behind that, then that becomes a problem.
Interesting. All right, Renee, the big reveal.
Okay. So if a high school profile states clearly what the policy is about reporting discipline, then the school is in the clear in acting in this manner. They have maybe gone a step beyond what they needed to do by informing the colleges out of goodwill that they don't expect a final transcript from us, is basically what they're saying. But they haven't said anything about the reason. Maybe the family shifted. Who knows, right? If that line up there in italics was not on the school profile, this would be a problem. The school can't say something like that if the university's assumption is that they're reporting discipline. And that is the assumption unless you have a line, something to this effect on your school profile. So if your school does have a policy of not reporting conduct or academic integrity incidents, or not all of them, then you need to state clearly what that policy is on high school profiles. And then you're covered if an incident comes up later in the year, and then you have to know how to handle it at that point.
And to that end, the new CEPP actually codifies this, that high schools now have a responsibility to indicate on their transcript what their discipline policy is, so that we know. Now,
Profile.
Sorry, yes. So from my university colleagues, I think most often when this would occur, well, honestly, I've never had that occur. But probably what we get most are reports of plagiarism, or perhaps a student was suspended for a fight in a washroom or something like that. In each case that's not true. We had one that was gnarly. Most of the time, the students are reporting that directly to us with a copy to the counselor, which indicates to us that their statement has veracity, that they've been counseled, and then the university so it's self-disclosure and the university acts accordingly.
Yeah, I was just going to add to that too. Sometimes when a student, or if the student doesn't indicate that they do get enrolled, they get the admission, then at that point it goes over to student affairs to make that decision. And they will have a committee meeting to decide what to do with that student. But if it's at the admissions, that could just be, depending on how severe the incident is, it could just be a slap on the wrist, a warning. It totally depends for the student. Because the whole idea is to give that student the opportunity. And we all know high school students do a lot of foolish things that they eventually regret. And we as an adults do foolish things that we regret as well. So, it's to give everybody an opportunity or a second chance in life.
Nadia's made a very good point. In the admissions process, we had two complaints at Indiana University this past term for students who had already, we had more than that, but two, for students who had already been admitted. We received disciplinary disclosure from the students. In both cases, because the student had been admitted, it had to go on to a behavioral committee that involves faculty. They reviewed the statement, considered it, and in both of those cases, the admission was not rescinded. It was maintained. But I think in one of those instances in particular, really the reason that admission was upheld was because the student had self-disclosed. So there's an integrity factor that comes into play in those decisions. That was kind of a parenthetical. But.
Yeah. this is something I've had to update because it's the season for updating school profiles. Because as of September
16th, 17th, and stay tuned. We'll have more.
we do need to be in compliance with this as schools. So if your school doesn't report everything, then you need to have a line somewhere on your school profile that gives some explanation of what you do and don't report.
I think also as counselors it can be helpful to know that when students submit applications, I have never seen a university application that does not have, as part of the signing of the application, a statement about academic integrity, behavior, requiring that the student disclose. So that's something to be aware of as well. And I say that from a U.S. university perspective.
Thanks, Ray. That was my question. I've had a situation as a school counsellor of two students both involved in an incident, one holding offer from the US and one holding offer from the UK. And the student who applied to the US, we are duty bound to inform. We inform the student's offer was rescinded. The student at the UK, the university goes, "Why are you telling us?" How does that work in CEPP for non-US members? What's the university side of this as to how universities should conduct themselves?
So that then becomes an institutional decision as to what they're going to do with the information. Whether or not the information is disclosed is where the CEPP would provide guidance. So if you were to put on your profile statement, "We will disclose," you would need to disclose any issue to any university they've applied to.
Well, and I'll speak to this because I have a British administrator at my school that believed in not disclosing and didn't understand how understanding American universities could be when they saw a student self-disclose and that growth of character. So my school's policy is that we disclose when asked, and then there's kind of a leveling of which incidents or repeat incidents of certain things. So yeah, that one had to go to my school's committee and everybody had to give their opinion. So that may be the case for some of you as well.
And CEPP would not become involved so long as
we disclosed it on the profile.
Exactly. Yeah. And then it becomes the UK university's decision whether or not they care. And any university does with it as they will.
Certainly,
School is free of.
School is free.
that has been something that students who have been through significant conduct incidents, and say in grade 11, once they're aware that the school reports when asked, then they start looking at regions where they won't be asked. So that becomes a counseling conversation then.
In a very egregious circumstance at an institution where I've worked, a student, a very significant violent event had occurred, and it was not disclosed to the university. Both the perpetrator and the victim ultimately enrolled at that university. And the parent of the victim was the one who notified the admissions office after both students had arrived. They saw each other at orientation. It was not a great situation. That's the extreme that we're trying to avoid.
Oh, we do have one more case study. You guys are ready to go for another, or should we wrap her up?
Well, I wonder if there are any questions about this, because we have less than 5 minutes.
Yeah.
Is that right? Yeah.
I'm sure this has raised thoughts in your mind of sketchy things you've seen in the past year. So,
And I have a couple of precursors that are disclosures that are important to leave with.
As a employee of university and recruiting in countries, how are counselors, when we are coming to visit schools, how do we, trying to wrap up my head, how do we further push that students would be more aware that as representatives of institution, we are available to answer any type of questions for them, and that they can rely on your expertise and our expertise, and are not going outside to agents and everything like that, and receive our services for free?
Great question.
Conversation, I think when you come to visit the high schools, a conversation with the student should do it all. Once they have your visiting card, I'm sure the students, in my experience, the students are really not going to the agents if they've met a representative of the university that they would like to go to. Yeah.
So, a couple of quick disclosures. We have functioned very heavily within the gray in this session. Fear not, the National Association for College Admissions Counseling is going to, in the coming weeks, be putting out pretty significant information about when these will actually go into effect in September, because the initial ratification was a bit vague. There is also going to be further guidance on the early decision questions, so stay tuned in that space. We've illustrated a couple of examples that have been navigated, but that guidance may alter. So that's why we say with all of these, pay attention to the spirit and the ultimate intent. And if the ick factor is present, if it doesn't bode well, send those to us, because it certainly informs the conversations that will eventually codify some of this gray that we've uncovered today. That's it. And I will also mention, even if you're not a NACAC member, International ACAC will be putting that information out to its broader membership, and it will be posted through CIS and several different venues. So watch for the information. And of course, if you don't see it, email any of us.
Yeah, any of us.
I believe there's one more ethics session.
Yes.
Tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, tomorrow, actually representation from same time tomorrow. We have a representative from NACAC who functions within the international space, and we will be doing another session. Not so much a deeper dive into this, but a little bit more historical context, outlining more specifically what some of those changes are. But we really hope that this has helped you understand why the SPGP exists and how you can navigate it. All right. Thanks so much.